What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. All right, wanted to go over a different subject today. We've been talking a lot about Dynasty, but I want to talk about best ball leagues. Definitely one of my favorite things to do, especially in the off season. I found that this platform and this particular type of leagues actually really helps prepare for your season long leagues, just because when you have money in the game, you end up gonna it's you can treat it kind of like you would a mock draft, but with some stake in the game, so you're going to care a lot more about it. If you guys aren't familiar with what like a best ball 10 or an MFL, I used to call them MFL 10s, now they're best ball 10s. There's a couple websites that do this as well. The biggest ones are I guess this is fan ball, but they call them best ball 10s. And then the FFPC also has like high stakes best ball leagues. But if you've never been involved in a best ball league, the easiest way I can describe it to you is you simply just draft. There's no waivers, there's no free agency, there's no trading, there's no lineups. You just draft a team and then it sits there. And then each week it's going to that the season goes on, it'll create the best roster construction based on the players that you have. So if you have three quarterbacks on a team and there's only one quarterback starting spot, it'll put the top scoring quarterback each week. So the basic synopsis of this, if you're brand new to this, is you want to create a team with a lot of high variance players, guys that you might not typically want to own in a seasonal league are perfectly fine for best ball, because if they are top scoring player at their position, they're going to really help you out each week. And when they're not, they'll just sit on your bench. Who cares? So guys that are a lot higher floor and lower ceiling are guys that you typically want to stay away from. But there's a lot more strategy than just simply that. That's just the basic construction of it. We can do another video if you guys are really curious about best balls, but I wanted to at least go through that, make sure that cursory understanding is there. So 4for4 did a really, really good thing for us, and they dug into the data and actually broke down what were the roster constructions of the teams that won the majority of Fanball, which is the best ball 10s that we were just looking at over here. This is Fanball. And then FFPC, which is the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Again, those are the more higher stake leagues. So what did these two main platforms, what were the predominant teams built up as? So just for just cursory knowledge for people that don't know, Fanball does a 20 player roster. So you have one quarterback, two running backs, three receivers, a flex, a defense. They do full PPR, and then it's a total of 20 roster spots. So you get 11 bench players. So it sounds like a lot, but when you don't have waivers, if you have an injured player on your team, they just sit there. Those 20 roster spots can become real slim real fast. So how you build your roster, the number of quarterbacks, running backs, receivers on your team, that is pivotal to your strategy and being able to max out your potential to score. So I've seen a lot of different concepts, take running backs early, grab a lot of wide receivers late. I've seen people try like draft 4 running backs early and then dump the running back position for the rest of the draft and take like 10 receivers. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but there seems to be a little bit of an optimal way. Differs slightly, but based on 2019 roster constructions on Fanball, the top 2 win rates were comprised of teams that didn't take more than 2 quarterbacks, didn't take more than 2 defenses, and then they had a pretty even split, a little bit more weighted towards wide receiver than running back. As you can see, about 28% of teams only had 6 running backs, and that seems to be about standard. 7 to 8 receivers, 2 to 3 tight ends, and then you see this third ranked here. There's 3 quarterbacks, same here as the fourth. So pretty much, with the exception of this fourth one down here, what they're looking at is the onesie positions, the quarterback, the tight end, the defense. They're really only investing 3 in one of them. And really what that is going to end up getting down to is if you draft higher quarterback, like if you get a guy that's you're expecting to finish in the top 5, you're not going to want to draft 3 quarterbacks, because most likely if you hit on the guy that you drafted, the other guys that you drafted are just going to sit on your bench. So if you get a higher quarterback or a higher tight end for that matter, you're going to want to draft a guy that's truly just there for like a week or two that he might be off because of injury or bye weeks. Whereas if you draft later, probably the reason why that tight end strategy ended up working out. There's most likely construed from a lot of teams that drafted 3 tight ends later and were just going for high upside to hit on the weeks that tight end scores a touchdown. You get guys like Jared Cook every year that you're happy starting them 6 weeks out of the year, and the rest of the year you're pretty upset. So basically, in 20 player rosters, you're not focusing too much on quarterbacks, tight ends, or defense. It's obviously always going to be about the running back and wide receiver, just hitting as many high variance guys as you can. Now, they dig a little bit deeper though in terms of how you actually go about building this roster in terms of like early round strategy. Because once you get to about the 10th round, you're just throwing dart picks at pretty much every position, just trying to get someone that is clearly undervalued. But once you get past the 10th round, you're just going after names that you think have a good chance of outperforming their production. But your core of your roster is going to be developed in the first 6 rounds. So they also broke out for us of the teams that won, what were the first 6 picks looking like? So a quarter of teams were 50-50 between running back and wide receiver. If you add another 20%, you bring in teams that drafted an early tight end. So last year, obviously, that was your Ertz, your Kittle, your Kelseys. And then if you go down, you got 20 more percent where people did 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and a tight end. You'll start to notice a trend here. Well over a half, I believe about 70% of winning teams did not draft a quarterback with their first 6 picks. Now, I know a lot of people would be saying, well, that's because of Lamar Jackson, but arguably, they even go into that here. Over the last 5 years, only on average, half of the quarterbacks that you rank in the top 12 based on ADP actually finish in the top 12. And then only a quarter of them actually finish in the top 5. If you really want to win a league in a best ball league, you're going for high upside. You want to draft a quarterback that gets in the top 5. But we actually, as a whole, as a community, have not done a great job of being able to predict who the top 5 quarterbacks are going to be. We've had a lot of surprises, especially in the last 2 years with Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. So investing early in a quarterback is a surefire way of limiting your upside and preventing you from actually having a chance at winning one of these best ball 10s. So if there's one piece of strategy you need to take away from this, is that even though this is a best ball, and yes, you can look and say, well, I want a quarterback that's going to score a lot of points because this is a point scored league. Quarterbacks, even though they score the most points, you're going to find way more value if you wait. Next, obviously, it should go without saying, you're not drafting more than 1 tight end. And if you are drafting a tight end in the first 6 rounds, you're probably not going to take a mid-tier guy. Last year, anyone that drafted Hunter Henry or Evan Ingram or O.J. Howard should know by this point, those guys rarely work out the way that you hope. So if you're taking a tight end early, it has to be Kittle or Kelsey. Otherwise, you're going to punt tight end. I want to dig into this a little bit deeper in some later videos, but I'm going to also argue that based on the way that this is constructed, you're going to want to focus on running backs first. We've talked about this in some other videos, and I'm going to be hitting on this a lot as we go through the summer and we start preparing for 2020. But there's still, and I will admit I was even part of this bandwagon, there's still a huge remnant of people that overvalue wide receivers in fantasy. And the reason why is there were a few years where running backs were often injured. And yes, running back is a highly injury-prone position, but wide receivers get hurt too. And there were a few years in fantasy where wide receivers were dominant. Think of I believe it was 2014 was the year that you had Antonio Brown and Julio Jones go off. You had a year where Antonio Brown and Demaryius Thomas were fantastic for multiple years. And those guys gave you significant advantage over the replacement player at that position. Well, when you look at 2019 and even just the past couple years, actually, I'm going to pull that up. All right, you guys convinced me I needed to pull up some data here just to kind of show my point. So the variance, let's just throw Christian McCaffrey out. Like 471 points is stupid. Averaging 29 points per game, that's just insane. Like, of course, significant advantage. You're basically playing two players in one slot at that point. So forget about Christian McCaffrey. Let's just look at the rest of the guys. So you got Aaron Jones, Ezekiel Elliott, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook. All these guys averaging around 20 points per game, right? So you get this elite tier of guys. Then you have another tier of Fournette, Chubb, Kamara, Barkley, Ingram, guys averaging around 16 to 18 points. And basically, you'll see all the way through running back 23, you're averaging close to 15 points. Well, then what happens once you get to running back 24 with David? Uh, I can't think of a bad name for him. He sucked. 10 points per game. 10, 10, 10, 9, 9, 9. A little bit of 12 here with Devin Singletary. Came on towards the end of the year. Well, in a best ball league, 10 points a game is not moving the needle for you at all. So if you had a best ball team last year, you probably only won if you had a couple of guys that were in this upper echelon of running backs. That cliff comes real fast. And this has been the way that it's been for a really long time. Well, let's jump over to the receivers. We'll ask the same question. So obviously you have Michael Thomas at the very top as we wait for this to load. 374. Again, super significant, fantasy positional advantage going here with Michael Thomas. But what you notice with wide receivers as we go down here, after you get past Michael Thomas, what do you see here? Small gaps, small gaps, small gaps, small gaps, small gaps. There are a few points. Yeah, a few points matter, especially in a best ball league. But we're all the way down here to wide receiver 24. And we've only dropped 60 points from wide receiver 2. Small gaps, small gaps, small gaps, small gaps. Finally 100 points off. All the way down to wide receiver 35. Keep going, keep going, keep going. The drop off from after you get outside of the ridiculous outlier position guys like Michael Thomas, the drop off from tier to tier is so much smaller for wide receiver than it is for running back. So, of course, wide receivers are still the second most important position in a best ball league. Maybe you could argue the tight end are a little bit more important, especially in FFPC leagues where it's tight end premium. We'll get into that in a second. But again, back to my original point. We'll go into some individual strategy videos of how to build a roster. We'll do some mock drafts. But as you're investing in these first 6 rounds, you got to prioritize these running backs. If you can hit on 2 or all 3 of your first 3 running back picks, you're going to be set up for a significant advantage. Because then as you lay down 8 receivers, even if they're guys later, you can get guys that might only have like 4 good games in round 16, round 17. But if those 4 good games are high point totals, like you think of like Will Fuller last year had like 3 good games, but the one game he had over 50 points, those are the types of late round picks that you're going to need to make to win a best ball league. You're not going to find running backs that are going to score you 50 points in round 16. Very, very, very rarely. Wide receivers, guys like Mecole Hardman that nobody's paying any attention to, great late round picks. Deshaun Jackson, everyone thinks he's done. Those are the kind of guys that win you leagues like this. Like I said, we'll get more into the strategy when we look at some of the mock drafts that we'll do. But anyway, just wanted to real quick also just touch how does this change for the FFPC? So the FFPC does things a little bit differently. It's still PPR, but they do tight end premium. So I believe it's 1.5 points for tight ends. So tight ends are a little bit more valuable in this league. They also do, you have to start a kicker, and I believe you only start 2 wide receivers, but then you get 28 roster spots. So you get a little bit more depth. So we would expect then, okay, well, if you have more depth, you probably want to give yourself a little more insurance on quarterback and defense. Because if a quarterback gets hurt or you have a quarterback that underwhelms for part of the year, you just give yourself a little bit more insurance. And since these are high stakes leagues, obviously you want to go for a little insurance, but ultimately the same principle applies. If you hit on a quarterback, you're not going to want to spend a ton of picks on that quarterback, even though you have 28 roster slots. If you don't hit on a quarterback, you're not going to win. And you're trying to be the best of every team in your league, you need to hit on a lot of your picks to make that happen. So if you're anticipating that you're not hitting on your picks, you've already lost. We see tight ends are a little bit more prevalent as well. The top 16 or 17% of teams had 4 tight ends, but again, similar 7, 6 running backs, 8, 9 receivers. So a couple more of those roster slots are allocated to wide receivers, just grabbing a little bit more of those high variance guys. But then when we look at the first 6 rounds, same trend. No quarterbacks until down here, 9th ranked roster construction. So well over 50% of teams won without taking quarterback in the first 6 rounds. So I think we beat that to death. Don't draft a quarterback in the first 6 rounds. And if you can't get a guy like Dak or Kyler in the 7th, then you're probably waiting until round 10 or later. Same thing here. We do see in FFPC leagues, the vast majority of teams that won by taking a tight end in the first 6 rounds. And this makes sense. It's tight end premium. So this is going to place a high value on Kelsey and Kittle. But if you can nab a guy like Mark Andrews later, or not, obviously not later this year, but similarly to last year where you could get Mark Andrews way later, there's still tight ends, guys like Tyler Higbee, Mike Gesicki, and again, we can go over all the tight ends here. But in the FFPC, you're definitely going to want to prioritize taking a tight end in an earlier round just because of the additional points that they end up offering, and there is a pretty steep drop in tight end points scored, similar to how we see with the running backs between the top tier guys and the bottom tier. So in the FFPC, you're really going to want to make sure you at least get someone that you're going to be comfortable starting most of the year. But again, those running backs, you're going to want to make sure you prioritize them over the receivers because, again, you can stock up. You can go 9 receivers deep. So if you have a bunch of flyer picks at wide receiver. I mean, think of like guys like James Washington last year. They had I can't remember, 4 or 5 games where they scored at least as a wide receiver too. You can get him at the very last pick of your draft in best ball leagues last year. Those are the types of moves that help win you weeks. But you need to put those guys on a team that already has a strong roster construction of really good running backs, and especially in the FFPC with tight ends, and one where you did not spend high capital on quarterbacks. So this is my cursory view, my overview into some of the other videos we're about to do on best ball. We'll get, like I said, we'll get into some mock drafts here in the next couple of videos. But overall, if you're looking to do some best balls, which I highly recommend, they're a ton of fun. Just if there's a few things you want to take away from this, just prioritize running back. If you're in the FFPC, go after a tight end. But if you're just doing best balls, I mean, if you just want to dip your toes in the water, they have $5 best balls. That's great. They're really easy to get into, tons of fun. But if you're doing best balls outside the FFPC, focus on those running backs, get a couple wide receivers, and do not be tempted to take Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes or anyone early. You want to go after guys that have the potential to finish top 5 in the position later in the draft. Like I said, you could get Kyler or Dak in the 7th, I'd pull the trigger. Otherwise, I'm waiting until round 10 or 11. You can get guys like Drew Brees, Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford was going to finish top 5 if he didn't get hurt last year. And the offense is arguably better this year. So those are the kind of moves that you need to be looking to make if you want to win in best ball. But that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. We'll get into some more best ball videos later, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.